the first time I realized our neighborhood had a problem. I was standing in the rain at 9 o'clock at night watching a stranger unlock dozens of our mailboxes like he belonged there. I remember the feeling more than anything else. That strange moment when your brain keeps telling you there has to be a normal explanation, but your instincts are already screaming that something is wrong. Because the truth was simple. Someone who didn't live in our community had access to every single piece of mail that carried our names, our addresses, and our private information. My name is Daniel Harper, and before all of this happened, I was just another homeowner in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, where people mostly worried about lawn height, noisy dogs, and whether the grocery store down the road would ever stop changing its opening hours. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their driveways, where kids played basketball until their parents called them home, and where everyone knew exactly which house had the best Christmas decorations every December. I had lived there for 12 years, and honestly, I thought I knew the place pretty well. I knew the retired couple who planted roses every spring. I knew the guy who always fixed old cars in his garage, and I definitely knew the one neighbor who could turn any simple HOA discussion into a full courtroom argument about trash bins and sidewalk cracks. Every neighborhood has someone like that. You could ask them what time it is, and somehow 20 minutes later you'd be hearing about how the community was declining because someone painted their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. But overall, Willow Creek was peaceful. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safe. That changed in March when our HOA announced what they called a Community Efficiency Improvement Plan. The announcement arrived in our mailboxes, ironically enough, printed on expensive paper with professional photos and carefully chosen words. The board said individual mailboxes were outdated, inconvenient, and expensive to maintain. Their solution was simple: remove every mailbox in front of every home and replace them with one large centralized mailbox station near the neighborhood entrance. At first, most people complained a little, but nobody really fought it. And looking back, that was probably the mistake we all made. We treated it like a small inconvenience instead of a major change. During the HOA meeting, our president, Linda Whitmore, stood in front of the room with a slideshow behind her and explained why this was the future. She had that confident smile people wear when they've already made up their minds and are just waiting for everyone else to agree. This is about creating a cleaner, safer, and more organized community, she said. Sometimes progress means adapting to new systems. A few people asked questions. Some wondered why the HOA couldn't simply repair the old mailbox posts. Others asked whether residents had voted on the change. Linda answered politely, but there was always this feeling that the decision had already been made before anyone walked into that room. Still, nobody wanted to become the person fighting over mailboxes. We had jobs, families, bills, and real problems. Compared to everything else going on in life, walking a few extra minutes to pick up a letter didn't seem worth the argument, so we accepted it. By April, the old mailboxes were gone. In their place stood a long row of gray metal compartments near the entrance of the neighborhood, right beside a line of birch trees. It wasn't exactly beautiful, but it worked. At least that's what we thought. The funny thing is, after a while, it almost became part of our routine. I started taking my morning walk down there with my coffee. I'd see neighbors I normally never talked to, and we'd joke about the weather or complain about traffic. It actually brought people together in a strange way. Nobody thought the mailbox station would become the center of a problem that would divide the entire neighborhood. Then small things started disappearing. Nothing dramatic at first. Just little mistakes that were easy to ignore. My electric bill arrived 6 days late. I remember opening the envelope and thinking maybe the utility company had messed something up. Then my neighbor Carol Jenkins told me her prescription medication never arrived. Carol was 71, lived alone, and depended on those refills showing up on time. She called the post office, and the answer she received was the same one that bothered me. According to our system, everything was delivered. Those words stayed in my head. Everything was delivered. Maybe according to a computer screen. Everything was fine. But the people living here knew something wasn't adding up. Every afternoon around 2:45, I watched the mail truck pull in, the carrier load the compartments, and leave. The system said the job was done. The record said nothing was wrong, but somehow, important things were disappearing between the mailbox and our hands. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself not every missing envelope meant something suspicious. Mail gets delayed. Packages get misplaced. Systems make mistakes. That's life. Then came the night of May 17th. A storm had rolled through earlier that evening, leaving the streets covered with that fresh, wet smell you get after rain hits warm pavement. I was driving home around 9 when I saw something near the mailbox station that made me slow down. There was a flashlight moving across the metal doors. At first, I thought maybe one of my neighbors was checking their mail late. Nothing unusual about that. But then I saw him. A man in a dark jacket was standing there with multiple compartments open. Not one mailbox, not two, several. He moved quickly, confidently, like he wasn't worried about being caught. And then I noticed the detail that made my stomach drop. He wasn't forcing anything open. He was using a key. I stopped my truck halfway down the road, headlights shining across the mailbox station. The man looked up and saw me. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. It was one of those moments where everything feels strangely quiet, even though your heart is pounding. He looked surprised, not confused, surprised, like he wasn't expecting anyone to see him. Then he closed the doors, walked quickly toward a white van parked near the curb, and drove away. No company logo, no explanation, no hesitation, just gone. I sat there staring at those mailbox doors, trying to convince myself there had to be some innocent reason. Maybe he was maintenance. Maybe there was some mistake. Maybe I had misunderstood what I saw. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This wasn't about a late bill or a missing package anymore. Someone had access to our mail. And the question that kept me awake that night wasn't who the man was. It was who gave him the key. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm even went off. I barely slept that night because my mind kept replaying the same few seconds over and over again. The flashlight moving across the mailbox doors, the man looking up at me, the way he froze when he realized someone had seen him. The more I thought about it, the less it felt like a random mistake. So after breakfast, I did something I probably should have done sooner. I started asking questions. I posted in our neighborhood group chat, keeping it simple at first. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't want to sound like the guy wearing a conspiracy hat at a neighborhood barbecue. I just wrote, "Has anyone else noticed missing mail lately?" Within minutes, the responses started coming in, and that's when I realized I wasn't the only one. One neighbor said her tax documents never arrived. Another said a replacement credit card was supposed to come but never showed up. Someone else mentioned the package that was marked delivered but disappeared before they could pick it up. Suddenly, all those little things everyone had brushed off started connecting. It was like we were all holding separate pieces of the same puzzle, and nobody realized it until someone finally put them on the table. By that afternoon, people were angry. Not the usual HOA angry, where someone complains about a fence being 2 inches too tall. This was different. This was personal. Mail isn't just paper. It's your life moving through an envelope. It's medical information, financial records, family photos, things that belong to you. The thought that someone could casually open those boxes bothered everyone. But what bothered me even more was one simple question: how could anyone outside the neighborhood get access? That evening, I pulled out my HOA folder from the filing cabinet in my office. I had kept almost every notice they had sent over the years, mostly because I learned a long time ago that with HOAs, paperwork matters. People can argue about memories and conversations, but documents don't forget. I started going through everything related to the mailbox project: maintenance notices, meeting summaries, budget approvals, emails. Most of it was exactly what I expected: boring language about upgrades and improvements. But then I found something that made me stop. It was an amendment dated February 14th, about a month before the mailbox changes were announced. The wording was buried under a section about community logistics. At first glance, it looked harmless. Shared access coordination for efficiency alignment. That was the kind of phrase that sounded like it came from someone who wanted to make something complicated enough that nobody would ask questions. I read it again, then again. Shared access. Those two words bothered me. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat there staring at the page, wondering what exactly we had agreed to without knowing. So I started digging deeper. I searched county records. I looked through public permits. I checked zoning documents. I spent 2 nights doing something I never expected to do when I bought my house, investigating my own neighborhood like I was chasing a story for the local news. And slowly, the picture started becoming clear. Across the main road from Willow Creek, a new commercial storage facility was being built. I had seen the construction trucks, but I never paid much attention. It was just another development project. What I didn't know was that the new delivery entrance for that facility was located right beside our centralized mailbox station, the same mailbox station the HOA had just created, the same mailbox station where a stranger had been standing with a key. My heart started beating faster when I found an email chain between the HOA board and the developers. Buried deep in the conversation was a document showing that Linda Whitmore, our HOA president, had signed an agreement allowing temporary access for delivery coordination. I just sat there staring at her signature on my screen, because suddenly everything made sense. The mailbox station wasn't just placed there because it's convenient for residents. It was placed there because it was convenient for someone else, too. The next few days, I became obsessed with finding every detail. My wife, Rachel, told me I needed to sleep. She said I was going down a rabbit hole, and maybe she was right. But every time I thought about Carol waiting for medication that never arrived, or someone's tax documents disappearing, I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about how easily this happened. Nobody broke a window. Nobody forced a lock. Nobody did anything dramatic. It happened because a group of people in a meeting decided a small change would make life easier, and nobody bothered to ask what they were giving up in exchange. That's the thing about trust. Most of the time, you don't notice when you hand it away. You only notice when someone misuses it. By Friday, I had everything printed out: the amendment, the emails, the zoning documents, the access agreement. I highlighted dates, signatures, and sections that showed exactly what had happened. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I just wanted answers. But I knew the HOA meeting that night was going to be different. When I walked into the clubhouse, I could feel the tension before I even sat down. Word had already spread around the neighborhood. People weren't whispering about missing packages anymore. They were asking who knew what and when they knew it. Linda stood at the front of the room like she always did, calm and prepared. She had her notes in front of her and that same confident expression from the mailbox presentation weeks earlier. She started talking about cooperation and patience, but this time nobody was smiling. After a few minutes, I stood up and walked toward the front table with my folder in my hand. The room got quiet. Linda looked at me and said, "Daniel, if this is about the mailbox complaints, I think we've already explained the situation." I looked at her and said, "No, Linda. You explained the mailbox. You never explained the access." I placed the documents on the table in front of her. "You told us this was about convenience, but you never told us you gave outside parties a reason to be right next to our mail." For the first time all night, she didn't have an immediate answer. People started leaning forward. Everyone wanted to see what was in those papers. Linda picked up the documents and scanned through them. Her expression changed slowly. The confidence faded. The room that was once controlled by the HOA board was suddenly filled with questions they couldn't easily answer. And that was the moment I realized something important. Sometimes the biggest problems in a community don't come from people breaking the rules. Sometimes they come from the people who are supposed to protect them quietly changing the rules when nobody is watching. The room stayed silent after I placed those documents on the table, and honestly, that silence told me everything I needed to know. It was the kind of silence where nobody was reaching for an excuse yet, because everyone was still trying to process what they were seeing. A few weeks earlier, That same room had been filled with polite conversations about progress and improvement, people sipping coffee, nodding along, and trusting the people sitting at the front of the room. But now every person there was looking at the same papers, the same signatures, and the same question hanging in the air. How much had we been left out of? Linda Whitmore picked up the documents slowly. She looked through the pages one by one, and for the first time since I had known her, she didn't seem completely prepared. She wasn't standing there with a presentation behind her. She wasn't explaining a new community initiative. She wasn't telling everyone why a decision was good for them. She was just reading, and everyone was watching. "Daniel," she finally said, trying to keep her voice calm, "I think there may be some misunderstanding here." I looked at her, and honestly, that sentence almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly the kind of sentence people use when they know something has gone wrong but don't want to admit how serious it is. "A misunderstanding?" I asked. "Linda, people's mail was disappearing. Someone outside this neighborhood had access to our mailbox station. And you're telling us the problem is a misunderstanding?" A few people in the room nodded. Others started whispering. The energy had completely changed. The HOA board was used to residents asking questions about landscaping rules and parking regulations. They were not used to being questioned about security, privacy, and accountability. One of the neighbors, Mark Ellis, who had actually supported the mailbox project from the beginning, stood up from his chair. That part surprised me because Mark was usually the guy who avoided conflict. He was the kind of person who would rather repaint his entire fence than argue with a neighbor about the color. But that night he looked frustrated. "Linda, I defended this project," he said. "I told people it was harmless. I told my wife we were making a big deal out of nothing. But did you ever tell us about this access agreement?" Linda paused. She looked down at the papers again. "The agreement was temporary," she said. "It was only for delivery coordination with the construction project nearby." And that was the moment people really started getting angry, because she still wasn't answering the question everyone cared about. The question wasn't whether the agreement was temporary. The question was why residents had never been told. Carol Jenkins slowly stood up. She was holding a small folder in her hands with her prescription information inside. "My medication never arrived," she said quietly. "Do you understand what that means? I didn't lose a coupon. I didn't lose some random advertisement. I lost something I needed." The room went completely quiet again. That was the moment the argument stopped being about documents and became about people, because behind every missing envelope was a person, someone waiting for something important, someone wondering why a system that was supposed to work suddenly didn't. Linda looked uncomfortable. She apologized and said the board never intended for anyone to feel unsafe. She said they believed the arrangement was limited and controlled, but that was the problem. Intentions don't erase consequences. Nobody in that room believed Linda woke up one morning wanting to put the neighborhood at risk. That wasn't the point. The point was that she and the board made a decision for hundreds of people without giving them the information they needed to make their own choice. They had taken something personal and treated it like a simple operational detail. A mailbox wasn't just a metal box. It was where our identities passed through every day. It held our bank statements, our medical records, our personal letters, and pieces of our lives we expected to remain private. And they had turned that private space into something connected to a business project across the street. After the meeting, the story spread beyond Willow Creek. Several residents had contacted local reporters, and within days Channel 9 began looking into what happened. Cameras showed up outside the clubhouse. Neighbors who had never spoken publicly before started sharing their experiences. The reporter asked Linda a simple question. "Do you believe residents should have been informed before outside access was granted?" Linda gave a careful answer about improving communication and reviewing procedures. It sounded professional, but everyone watching knew it avoided the heart of the issue. The damage had already been done. The strange thing about situations like this is that the actual fix can happen quickly. The trust takes much longer. Within a week, the HOA removed the access arrangement. The mailbox area was secured with a new fence. All previous access permissions were revoked. New keys were issued to residents. and the developers across the road were completely separated from our mail system. Standing there after the repairs were finished, I remember looking at that mailbox station and feeling two completely different emotions at the same time. Part of me felt relieved. The problem was solved. The person who shouldn't have had access no longer did. But another part of me felt disappointed because I realized something about communities that I had never really understood before. The biggest threats don't always come from obvious bad people. Sometimes they come from ordinary decisions made by people who convince themselves they are doing the right thing. Sometimes the problem isn't someone breaking the rules. Sometimes the problem is someone changing the rules quietly enough that nobody notices. Over the next several months, Willow Creek changed. HOA meetings became longer because people started asking more questions. Residents read documents before signing anything. People stopped accepting vague explanations like, "It's more efficient," or "Everyone benefits." They wanted details. They wanted transparency. And honestly, I think that was the one positive thing that came out of all of it. We became neighbors again, not just people living next to each other. We started paying attention. We started showing up. We started realizing that a community only works when the people inside it are willing to protect it. A few months later, I walked back to the mailbox station early one morning with a cup of coffee in my hand. The sun was coming up through the birch trees, and everything looked almost exactly the same as it did before. Same metal doors, same neighborhood entrance, same quiet street. But I wasn't looking at it the same way anymore. I touched the little name label on my mailbox and thought about how something so ordinary had changed the way I saw trust. Because the truth is, nobody loses control all at once. It happens slowly, one small decision at a time, one convenient shortcut at a time, one moment where someone says, "Don't worry, we know what's best." And maybe the most important question we should ask whenever someone makes a decision for everyone else is not, "Will this be easier?" The question is, who is this actually easier for? Because sometimes the smallest changes reveal the biggest problems. And sometimes protecting your home means doing more than locking your doors. Sometimes it means paying attention to who is making the decisions behind them. Now I want to hear what you think. If you were part of Willow Creek Estates, would you have accepted the HOA's explanation, or would you have demanded answers the way we did? Do you think this was just poor judgment, or do you think residents' trust was seriously violated? Share your thoughts in the comments because these neighborhood conflicts are never just about mailboxes, fences, or rules. They're about power, responsibility, and whether the people making decisions truly understand the people affected by them. And if you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who believes every community deserves transparency, because sometimes the quietest problems are the ones that deserve the loudest voices.